The United Nations says at least 10 people have died and almost 50,000 others displaced after a tropical cyclone made landfall in Madagascar over the weekend. Cyclone Batsirai is the second major storm to hit the Indian Ocean island in 2 weeks. Widespread flooding and damage to property has been reported.
At least 10 people have died and more than 43,000 are displaced across 180 displacement sites. At least 211 schools have been affected, according to the National Office for Risk and Disaster Management. These numbers are expected to rise as we get more information. The first aerial assessment took place today with a UN humanitarian air service flight. Other needs assessments carried out by teams on the ground will follow for a more comprehensive overview to inform response priorities in the days ahead. The UN and our humanitarian partners, in close coordination with government counterparts, have deployed surge teams and are ramping up the response. The World Food Programme is distributing hot meals to evacuated and displaced people in shelters. The UN Children's Fund and other protection partners are providing kits for setting up child-friendly spaces and training social workers on gender-based violence and the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. The UN Population Fund and partners are providing psychosocial support and dignity kits for women and girls affected by gender-based violence and also medical care for survivors of sexual violence.
We're joined now by Timothy James Irwin, Chief of Communications for the United Nations Children's Fund in Madagascar. He joins us from the Malagasy capital of Antananarivo. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. If I could ask you to just give us a bird's eye view of what you're dealing with at the moment as we speak.
Well, some of the numbers that were just quoted in that clip that you played have increased during the course of the day. So we're now looking at around 20 people who have sadly died as a result of this cyclone, and around 60,000 people who have been displaced. The damage is very widespread in the southeast of the country. We have roads, many roads that have been destroyed and bridges that have been torn down. We have many schools that have been destroyed, many health centers that are no longer functional. So there is an urgent need to respond to the effects of this cyclone. And that's what we and other UN agencies are doing. We are working on the ground to get a better sense of the scale of the damage. And it's a changing situation, and the numbers continue to change as we speak. But in the days ahead, we will get a better sense of actually what has happened on the ground and then be able to respond more effectively.
We understand that some of the hardest hit areas include areas such as Madagascar. Just how bad is it, and how many of these are there that are considered unreachable?
As you said, Madagascar and those areas exactly on the southeast coast of the country, that was really where the cyclone hit on Saturday night, and those areas have experienced some significant damage. We have seen many houses destroyed. I mean, it's good to remember that this is a very poor country, and so many of the people who were living in those areas were living in very fragile houses, made of wood, sometimes made of bamboo. And so it's not altogether surprising that they were destroyed with the very high winds and very heavy rains that we experienced. But even more substantial buildings such as churches and schools where people were sheltering and had been pre-evacuated to, they were also damaged. Many had their roofs torn off. Trees had fallen into many of these buildings. And so there's a lot of work to be done. That's going to be hampered by the fact that many of the roads have been disrupted as a result of the flooding. Many of the bridges, as I said earlier, are no longer functional. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we, and together with other UN agencies and working with the government of Madagascar, are doing everything that we can to ensure that those people most severely affected are provided with the aid that they most desperately need.
Just how bad is the humanitarian situation? We understand that President André Rajoelina went to Madagascar earlier on to see the situation there. And this is a damage on top of damage from another cyclone last year.
Yeah, and in fact, we had a tropical storm not too long ago, which struck an area more north of the country where I am in the capital, Antananarivo, and we had very severe flooding in this area. And now we're seeing this cyclone hit an area further south of the country. And further south of that, of course, we have an ongoing drought situation. I mean, it's ironic, and maybe it's an indication of the effects of climate change, that within a couple of 100 kilometers, you have an area which is being hit by cyclone winds and rains, and south of that, you have an area which is experiencing long-term drought, and the effects of that, which include food insecurity and malnutrition among children. So it is a very serious situation. I know that, as you said, the president is down there at the moment. Heads of UN agencies, such as the head of UNICEF in Madagascar, are traveling down to the region tomorrow to get a better sense for themselves of what the situation is. And once we have a better sense of the number of people affected, the number of people made homeless, the number of people who have died tragically in this situation, we'll be able to better prepare our response. But having said that, the one positive note, if I may say that, is that we had a good amount of warning about the storm. The government and UN agencies and other relief organizations had a sense that this storm was coming for several days before it actually arrived. And so we were able to prepare, we were able to pre-position relief materials. And so we're in a good position now to respond very, very quickly once we have a better sense of exactly what the needs are.
I'm glad that you said that, because I was going to ask you what gains or at least experiences have been learned from Tropical Storm Anna, and in terms of early warning systems, how has that been? Because Madagascar itself is an impoverished country, so the health system, water distribution systems, how have they been affected? And tell us a little bit more about the agencies, other agencies that you're working with to try help alleviate the humanitarian situation.
Well, first and foremost, we're working with the government's emergency relief agency, which has really taken the lead in the response to this situation. And then, of course, we're working with our sister UN agencies, such as WHO for health and the World Food Programme for food relief. And, there are great needs on the ground. What we are seeing is a disruption of all social services, and so basically everything needs to be addressed. But as I mentioned earlier, we did have a sense that this was coming. And in fact, because it didn't hit the capital, Antananarivo, where I am, the effects are somewhat less than had been anticipated. They're still very serious, but had it hit a heavily populated area such as where I am at the moment, it could have been far, far worse. As it is, it hit an area which is somewhat less densely populated. The effects are still very serious. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's a situation which could have been worse. But I think together with the government, with other UN agencies, we will be addressing the situation very rapidly over the next few days.
And what can you contribute to the disaster management or emergency systems that are in place? Because I believe quite a few of the administrative buildings of the government have been destroyed. This should obviously add further pressure if you're looking at situations of coordinating housing, etc., etc.
Well, I think, as I mentioned, planning and being prepared ahead of time were key in this situation, and have allowed us to perhaps reduce the effects of this. Coordination between relief agencies such as UN agencies, such as non-governmental agencies, and the government is key. I think the pre-positioning that we have been able to do has had a significant impact, but the response to this is going to be long-term. There will be short-term responses such as, reopening of schools, reopening of healthcare situations, the rebuilding of infrastructure such as roads and bridges, etc. But this was likely to have a long-term effect such as we are seeing in the south of the country with the drought. So this is not going to be a response which will last weeks or months. I think this is going to be a response which is going to last significantly into the future.
But I'd imagine the good news, at least for the UN agencies and those that would have to help in other places like Mozambique that were hit by the previous storms, I believe this one has dissipated, that will have less of an impact as it goes down west.
That's right. So, this entered the country from the southeast. It went over the main part of the country, and then it headed towards the south, towards the South Pole. And so there's very little risk that this is going to impact southeastern Africa. So in that sense, yes, unlike in previous years, I think countries within the region can breathe a sigh of relief, yes.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to us. Much appreciated.